So what we're discussing now is how do we do sorting for an array. Yeah. So how we create an array in the first instance in C. So we've seen that already. You just have to use float x. If you just omit the square brackets, just write float x, it will be a normal variable able to store only one number. But now if you want to declare an array, you can just use a square brackets, and then the number you put inside it is the number of elements you have in the array. That's fine. But very important, if for example you have x10, the first element would be with index 0. In C, your elements, your indexes start at 0. Since you have 10 of them, the final element will have index of 9. So you have to be able to differentiate between the size of the array, which is used when you declare the array, as shown here, and actually now referencing the array in that way. So if you want to reference the first element of the array, it would be using an index of 0. The final element would have an index of 9. So it all have 10 elements. Okay. Now we also seen how you can now write a simple piece of code to be able to store numbers inside the array. Typically, a for loop is well suited for that. So you can use a for loop. Let's say you have, in this case, let me just write a small piece of code for you here. So if you write something like this, I'm not writing a full program, just part of the program. We know how to do that. So we know our index will start at 0. Yeah. And then we want to stop at 9. So I'm not putting equal to 10. We don't want to, because x10 doesn't exist in terms of indexing. Yeah. So be very careful in terms of the declaration and the actual indexing. So we need to stop at 9 and then plus I. Yeah. So using that for loop now, you can, for example, request a user phone numbers. You can say something like this, enter. I'm doing that in Paint. I can't execute it. I'm just showing you examples. So for example, you say enter array element like this, and then you say a message to the user, and then next will be scanf. Yeah. And then this is where you put %f, because our x now is float, so %f like we've done. And then you're going to use the ampersand, because we use the address always in scanf. And then x, of course, you put I now. Yeah, because as I is changing from 0 to 9 for every iteration now. And what's missing here is you need the curly brace here, because you have more than one statement inside your for loop, and that's it. So this piece of code there would allow you, after having declared your array, and of course you need to declare the I as well. In I, you need to do that before you can use I. We know in C, all the variables you're using should be declared first. So this small piece of code there would allow you, for every iteration for I starting at 0, is going to put that message on the screen, enter array element. And then when the user presses a number and then press enter, this number is going to be stored in your index 0, and then incrementing the index to 1. Same message will appear, enter array element, and then you press enter again, it goes to x1, x2, x3 until you reach 9. So this we do. Now, what's the purpose of today's session is to tell you how do we do a sorting. Let's say you have got an array from the user, be it of size 10 or size 20 or size 100. If I want to do a sorting in ascending or descending order, how can we do that? So this part there, you should be able to do that. You should be able to write what I've just done to request for numbers from the user. If you've not done that earlier, I would invite you to do that. After having got the array elements, you can now start, if I just do that, you can start now a new for loop to print the elements. So again, you start at 0. You can use the same I, of course. I less than 10, as usual, plus I. And now if you want to print the elements in a separate for loop, then you can, here we don't actually need the curly braces, because we will have only one printf, one statement attached to that. So you can just say printf /n if you want to change the line every time you print the array element. So you can just say array element %f again, because your array element was a floating point number, and then you close the double quotes, and then here you just put xi. In printf, of course, we don't use ampersand, we just use ampersand in scanf. Here it's just going to print the 9 elements of the array. So if you wanted to check if you have if the values have been properly saved in your array, you can just run a small piece of code. So I would invite you to write a very simple piece of code like this, where you are declaring an array and its index I, and then simply running a for loop to get, for example, 10 elements from the user, and then printing these 10 elements as shown here, and see if you are able to store these values in your array. Yeah, so I would invite you to do that. We've discussed this earlier. Now, today's session, like I said, is to see now how we do sorting. Yeah. So let's just take a simple example. I'm just going to put some number. Let's say the user input some values like this, 1.5, and then next one is, let's say, 2.5. We have floating point numbers, so -8. Let's just take 5 numbers for time being, just to start the discussion, and then we can easily, if we can get the rule for these 5 numbers, then it's going to be the same if you have 100 numbers or 1000 numbers. The code will run a similar way. Yeah. So for example, if the fourth element is, let's say, 5.6, and then the final element is, let's say, 0.5. Now, if you want to do a sorting here in, let's say, ascending order, means you want the smallest one first and then the largest one last. So how would you typically do that? You're going to, if I ask you to do that sorting, when you look at it, you immediately set -8 is the smallest one, then you would take 0.5, and then 1.5, 2.5, 5.6. So when you look at the numbers, it's very easy to do sorting. But when you want to do the sorting in a C program, especially if you have an array, you would need to deal with one element at a time. You can't look at the whole array at the same time, because when you run a for loop, like you can see here, you are always using one index at a time. Yeah, so you can't look at the whole array at the same time. So what method can we use to scan through this array and try to get it sorted in ascending order? So one thing we can do, one approach is, so we start a for loop to check this first number with the next one. Yeah, so we check with this one. If this number is, so we want to do ascending, means we want the smallest number to come first. Yeah, so we take this number here. I'm just going to undo. So we take this number, this one, we check with all the numbers. So we check in turn, of course. So we check this one with this one. If at any point when you're checking, if this number is more than this one, we will swap. So just apply this one. So if we compare 1.5 to 2.5, it is less, so we won't swap. Now we compare 1.5 with -8. It is now -8 is less, so we have to send -8 here. So if I just write down, when we compare 1.5 with the rest, -8 will come here. And then you have 2.5. We'll swap now with 1.5, and we're going to have 5.6 and 0.5. So if we keep doing that, we compare first this element with the rest. So at any point in time, if the number we're comparing with is less, we'll swap. Yeah. So we'll see how we do swapping in C. It's not very difficult. Now, after having got the first element, the smallest one, what you need to do next is you have to start comparing now this one with the remaining. So you have to compare this 2.5 with 1.5. We see, yes, it is less. So we have to swap these two. So this is what we get here. We get -8, 1.5, 2.5, 5.6, 0.5. It's not finished. We'll keep comparing now, since this is the position number 2. We'll keep comparing that one with the rest. 5.6 is not less. Then we compare 1.5 with 0.5. It is less, so we have to swap these two. So then we have a situation like this. We have -8. We swap is 0.5, 2.5, 5.6. Then the 1.5 will come last. Similarly, now we continue. We've done the index 0 and the index 1. Now we'll consider this one. Yes. So we compare 2.5, 5.6 is not 5.6 is not less than 2.5, so we won't swap. And we compare 2.5 with 1.5. It is less, so we have to swap. So means our array is going to be like this now: -8, 0.5, 1.5, 5.6, and 2.5. Yeah. So you reach the end of the array. You can't check for anything else. Next, we're going to take this one now. We compare with this element here. That's all we have left, and we found it is indeed less. So we have to swap. Then we come to a stage where it is -8, 0.5, 1.5, 2.5, and 5.6. So this is one way to do a sorting of an array. At any point in time means you have to compare one element with the next one, and of course you have to keep comparing that element with everything that's coming after it. After having compared this one with this one, if the number you're comparing to is less, you swap, because you want to have a smallest number at the start. On the other hand, if you wanted to do a sorting in descending order, means you want to have the biggest number first and then the smallest number last, then when you compare, then you would do the opposite rule now. When you're comparing two numbers, if that number now is greater than this number, then you will swap. So it's just a question of reversing the rules. Yeah. Now, one comment on swapping. Let's say when you're comparing this number here, so when you're comparing x0, so I'm going to write here x0 with x2. Yeah. When we compare x0 with x1, we found that actually the 2.5 is not less than 1.5, we won't swap, so there's nothing to do here. On the other hand, when we compare x0 with x2, which is -8, then we have to swap because the -8 is less than 1.5. We've said that. Now, how do we do a swapping? This is the topic now. Now, can we do something like this? If we say x0 is equal to x2, can we do that? Yeah. If we do that, the problem is our x0 was 1.5. It is getting a value of -8. That's fine. But we want also the x2 to become 1.2, but we've lost a value already. If we do that, x0 now is taking value of -8, but we want x2 to get a value of 1.5. If you do that, you've lost already the value 1.5, so you can't assign x2 to 1.5. So you can't just do it like this. It's not as easy as that. So it means before you do the swapping, you will have to store the number first. So you can store that in a temporary variable. Then you say temporary variable is equal to x0. Now it's stored. Then you can say x0 is equal to x2. Since now you store the value of x0 in temp, now you can say x2 is equal to temp. Get my point? So you can't just assign both together. You lose the value of x0. So before you can do the swapping, you have to store the value of x0 first. Then you can assign x0 to x2, fine. Then x2 is equal to the initial value of x0. So this is how you will swap two numbers. Okay. Now the next question is, how would we actually do that comparison? So we need two for loops here. One for loop to start. For example, if we have a for loop which starts with an index which starting with this one. So when we have this number there, the second for loop is going to allow us to compare this number with the remainder till the end. Okay. And when now we've done the comparison for the first one, then the outer for loop is going to shift to this one. The inner for loop now will start with this one and check with the rest. Okay. When the outer for loop, so we have a nested for loop here. The first for loop will always be starting at this one, and the second for loop will be checking with this number with the rest. When that inner for loop is finished, okay, it's now going to go back to outer for loop to change the second element, and now the inner for loop will run now from this index to the end, and so on. So it means you need to have two for loops. Yeah, two for loops. Okay, so I've just given some indications to you. I would invite you now to try to write this piece of code. So I would ask you to first get the numbers as shown here. This is optional if you want to print or not. But after having saved the numbers in an array, I want you now to try to develop, based on what I've just done here by taking some arbitrary values, try to develop the code to allow to do the sorting. Like I've said, you're going to basically have a for loop with an index I, for example, and another for loop with an index j. So I'm not giving you the answer now. I want you to try to develop it. It's not that difficult. The two for loop would basically be 3 or 4 lines, and you have something like this inside it. But of course, you won't have 0, 0, and 2, and so on. You will have the indexers there, I and j. So I'm inviting you now to think about it, how you can get an array from a user, first thing, and then try to do a sorting in ascending order. Yeah. So give it some time. I want you to get the algorithm. It's not difficult, but you will have to take examples like I've done here to actually do this calculation manually first. And then as you are doing the sorting, if something is not working right, I want you to go and debug inside the code why the swapping is not done properly. Like, just to recap, to finish for today, basically you're taking an element and checking with the rest coming after it. Okay. If at any point you're checking now, the number you're checking with For example, here 2.5 minus 8. If that number you're checking to is less, you would swap using this type of construct, but you won't have the fixed values here. It will be I or J. And then once you've checked the first number with the rest, then you're going to change this index here to second number, and you will check with the remaining. Of course, you won't check this number to this one because you have already done the check that this number is smallest. So you always check this number with the remaining on the right, and so on until you reach the point where you're checking this number with this one, and then you end. There's no point in the outer loop to have this number because there's nothing to check. It means, if for example in this case, you can find you have 5 numbers. So the index will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, like we said for arrays. It means in the outer loop, let's say for I is equal to 0, I less than 5. You never need this outer loop to go till this number, because you don't need to compare this number to anything else. It means the outer loop needs to stop at 1 number less. In that case, it needs to stop at so 0, 1, 2, 3 only. It doesn't need to go to 4. But the inner loop now, which is coming after it, needs to go to the n always, because when you reach here, you will need to compare these two. When that inner loop and outer loop is finished, then you've done the sorting. Yep. So like I said, you'll have 2 for loops, nested loops. One to take this number, and the inner loop to check this number with the rest. Okay. So give it a try, and then we'll discuss in class. Maybe tomorrow, or we have the MEC 2110 tutorial, and I would also do some sessions on diodes, and if we cannot open, so I can briefly just discuss this with you. Okay, so I'm stopping this session here now. So we meet tomorrow in class, then we can also take this up. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So I have recorded this session, so I'm going to send the video on the discussion we've had on the arrays, on the sorting, and of course there'll be a follow-up on that in class to see how we actually code it. It's not difficult. There are 5 lines of code, but very interesting algorithm for you to look at and try to run and see if it is really doing the sorting. So I would want you to think about this. Okay. So I'm ending the session here. Thank you.